Okay. Well, hello, friends. Welcome. It's wonderful to have you here at our event, Subnational Leadership on Climate Ocean Action, Assessing Risk and Deploying Local Response Strategies. My name is Jessie Turner, and I'm the director of the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification. Thank you. Thank you very much. Clapping for ocean acidification and action on climate ocean action. We were, as many of you here in the audience know, we were created by 4 subnational governments in direct response to some of the first ever observed impacts of ocean acidification on oyster hatchery production across the North American West Coast. And today, since launching in 2016, we are more than 120 members across 22 different countries, representing a diversity of national governments, subnational governments, tribes and First Nations, ports, cities, as well as affiliate members like NGOs, seafood industry, and science collaborators. And so together, we are really working to do 3 big things. The first is we need to keep elevating ocean and across climate commitments and policy. We need to be keeping up urgency and ambition for climate action, and we need to be translating policy or science into policy at local and regional scales. And our members help do this through the creation of what we call OA action plans. And to be very clear, we know that we need to achieve ambitious greenhouse gas emissions reduction as the first important step in mitigating ocean acidification. However, we know that there are things governments can and should be doing now to assess risk and think about the adaptation and resilience strategies that are going to be needed to address ongoing change. So today, we're going to hear from leaders on the front lines of addressing climate ocean change and hear about some of the strategies that governments are using to assess risk, leverage investments, and formulate solutions that will apply targeted science to local and regional policy and management. So, with that, it is my honor to turn it over to our first keynote speaker, Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici with the U.S. Congress and State of Oregon District 1. Suzanne.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? This is on? Terrific. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm really grateful for the leadership of the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification and the Pew Charitable Trust. Thank you for organizing this important discussion about this critical topic, climate ocean action. So I'm the co-chair of the House Oceans Caucus and the House Estuaries Caucus, where we find common ground on issues and where we recognize that the ocean covers most of the planet, and if the ocean isn't healthy, the planet isn't healthy. So I'm always looking for ways that our coastal, our marine, and our estuarial systems can help fight the climate crisis. So we know that climate change has become an undeniable part of our daily lives, affecting communities in Oregon and around the globe. And ocean and coastal ecosystems are often overlooked and undervalued. They're a tremendous resource, and we know must and can be part of the solution. They're essential in climate regulation. They provide solutions with mitigation and adaptation to climate-driven impacts. So on the west coast of North America, our culture, traditions, the economies are so strongly connected to our oceans, coasts, and estuaries. Fishing, aquaculture, recreation, shipping. We know that our coasts support thousands of family wage jobs, help maintain our cultural identities, and help feed people. But sadly, the region has experienced and is continuing to experience the ravages of climate change on the ocean. Sea level rise, ocean acidification, warming, reduced oxygen levels. So it's important to help decision makers and coastal communities get the information they need to act now to increase biodiversity and improve adaptive capacity. Natural climate solutions, like conserving and restoring coastal wetlands and protecting blue carbon ecosystems, these are essential tools for our national, our state, our tribal, and municipal governments to help meet climate goals. And in the U.S. federal and state governments, we're really accelerating our actions that provide solutions and address the increasing ocean climate impacts. So the U.S. is demonstrating both domestic and international leadership now on climate ocean change. The Biden administration's Ocean Climate Action Plan, which we're very excited about. The EPA's National Estuary Monitoring and Ocean Acidification Program, and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, their Ocean Acidification Program. And I want to note, being from Oregon, that our NOAA administrator, Dr. Rick Spinrad, comes to NOAA from Oregon State University, as did Dr. Jane Lubchenko, also from Oregon State University. So we're on the cutting edge out there in Oregon. So we also have legislation. I'm proud to sponsor and help pass into law the Bipartisan Coastal and Ocean Acidification and Threats Research Act, which is also known as the Coast Research Act, which will expand scientific research and monitoring of ocean and coastal acidification. We have also made historic investments through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Unprecedented funding levels for coastal resilience and infrastructure. So in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, $1.5 billion for coastal nature-based solutions to help communities by investing in natural infrastructure, projects that build coastal resilience, create good jobs, store carbon, remove marine debris, and restore habitat. And then with the Inflation Reduction Act, which I'm thrilled to say is getting very positive response, not only in the United States, but here at COP27, $2.6 billion to restore and protect coastal ecosystems. And these funds will go down to the coastal states and tribal and local governments and higher education institutions, so they can become more prepared and resilient to meet the changes in climate. And I note now that we've passed this unprecedented funding that we need the workforce to do the work, so just going to put that out there. We have a lot of good jobs in this really important field. So in addition, I've partnered on the Bipartisan Blue Carbon for Our Planet Act, because we know that, and again, this is something that Oregon State University really is taking the lead on. I remember having conversations back when, some of you may know the story of Whiskey Creek shellfish out on the Oregon coast, didn't know what was happening with their shellfish, and was working with Oregon State to adapt because of ocean acidification. So the Blue Carbon for Our Planet Act, we know that healthy blue carbon ecosystems, the mangroves, tidal marshes, sea grasses, and kelp forests, they can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it from centuries to millennia. And unfortunately, coastal blue carbon ecosystems are disappearing rapidly. So the Blue Carbon for Our Planet Act will help protect and restore those blue carbon ecosystems by strengthening federal research, and importantly by mapping and having an inventory of blue carbon ecosystems. So that mapping is going to help evaluate the carbon sequestration potential of these ecosystems to meet mitigation targets, but also to restore important habitat. So, one more page. So the U.S. at the state level, I'm proud that my home state of Oregon is a global leader in responding to ocean acidification and hypoxia, as well as exploring ways that coastal wetlands can support increasingly ambitious, important greenhouse gas reduction targets. So Oregon now has specific carbon sequestration goals for Oregon's coastal land and nearshore waters. The state is also working on blue carbon related strategies to grow its carbon pool and promote coastal resiliency. So I'm really excited to be working with that on our new governor-elect starting next year. And other states, including California and other coastal states, are working on these policies as well. And I think you're going to hear about that more from the panel. So the U.S. is helping to lead the way making sure that climate and ocean policies and investments accurately reflect the needs and the interdependence. And at the federal level and through the states, it's very important to demonstrate what actions are required to deliver on these high-level commitments. So climate change will only continue to harm people and the planet if we do not act now. So thank you again. We know we must significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also continue to build resilient coastal communities and ecosystems. So thank you all. I'm in the fight with you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of COP27.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congresswoman. What an incredible overview of the work that the federal government is doing about the type of science investments as well as nature-based solutions and real support on adapting to climate change for coastal communities and seafood grower communities as well as tribes and First Nations. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. Oregon is absolutely a world leader on thinking about addressing ocean acidification, hypoxia, and other impacts of climate change. And so thank you, truly. Great. Well, it is now my honor to introduce a second co-founder of the OA Alliance, the province of British Columbia, and specifically the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the Honorable George Hayman. And I'll just quickly say that, again, BC has been such a leader thinking about real innovative climate risk assessments that are informing your ongoing mitigation and adaptation strategies, and have been thinking about this action plan on ocean acidification hypoxia as part of that larger work. So we'd just love to hear your perspective on why BC is taking this on, and thank you for your leadership.
Is this? Yes, it is on. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here, and it's an honor for British Columbia to have been a founding member of the OA Alliance, and we're proud of that. We also have a lot to learn. One of the things that we get from the Alliance, besides the ability to work with neighboring jurisdictions like Oregon and California and Washington State, is the ability to learn from each other, which is so important. I just want to say, first of all, British Columbia, for those who don't know it, is the state immediately to the north of the border with Washington State, and has a little over 5 million people, so relatively small on a large landmass, but most of our population is along the coast and in the southern part of the province. We have been a member of the Pacific Coast Collaborative as well, and in that collaborative with Oregon, Washington State, and California, we have the opportunity to work together and to develop the synergies that we need to both adapt to the impacts of climate change as well as to reinforce each other's efforts to mitigate carbon emissions. I had a couple of hours off before joining you this morning, and I unfortunately spent my time reading news articles about what is the state of emissions in the globe right now, and it is scary, and it just highlights how important what's on the wall over there is. It really is high time for us to deliver on our commitments, to begin reducing significantly and quickly the amount of carbon we put into the atmosphere, because if we don't do that, the impacts that we're seeing in the oceans as well as in our rivers, on our lands, in our climate and the health of people are simply going to get worse. One of the things that we have learned a lot from is the work that's been done in California, led by Secretaries Wade Crowfoot and Yana Garcia. The work on the ocean acidification plan released in 2018 that monitors changes, that advances science, that develops policies. We quite shamelessly borrow from California a lot. It is, I think, understandable that a small jurisdiction, a relatively small jurisdiction like British Columbia, would seek to align our efforts with a very large economy to our south. Both the national economy and the state economy of California. It is critical in enhancing our credibility with our own people and in achieving the kind of economies of scale for action that we can't do on our own. I'm sure that Commissioner Lara from California will have more to say about about the efforts and the actions in California during the panel. What we've done in British Columbia is develop a legislated commitment to a 40% reduction in our emissions by 2030, 60 by 2040, and we're about to legislate net zero by 2050 unless we decide that we can be more ambitious than that. We have a plan called the Clean BC Roadmap to 2030 that lays out across 8 different pathways in all sectors, whether it's buildings and communities, transportation, industry, and specifically oil and gas, sectoral targets to combine to meet our legislated target. It's a good plan. It's been modeled in a way that tells us we can reach our goal if we stick to the plan, which is, of course, the challenge that we all face, because the situation and the context is always fluid and always changing, and the public will changes. It doesn't mean that climate becomes less important, but when people are struggling with a rising cost of living, when people are struggling with a pandemic, when they're struggling with other matters, the focus can change. And it's the responsibility of governments, all governments, frankly, no matter what particular side of the political spectrum we come from, to maintain the focus that's needed to meet our targets, as well as put an equal focus on what we need to do to adapt and to prepare for the climate impacts that we know we can't escape. So Jesse, you referenced our risk assessment in British Columbia. We did a high-level climate risk assessment a couple of years ago, and we identified 15 critical risks, of which acidification and hypoxia of oceans was one of the most significant. And it's significant both because of the impacts we can expect and because of the significant role that oceans play in our economy, in our culture, in our identity, and also in the culture, the identity, and the food-sustaining economies of Indigenous people along our coast. As a side note, British Columbia legislated in our own action plan, our Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and everything we do now involves consultation, deep consultation and collaboration with Indigenous people, and trying to incorporate Indigenous knowledge along with Western science in our approaches to things. So oceans, salmon, shellfish are critical to Indigenous identity, to their economies, to their way of life. And unlike for those of us like me whose ancestors came to British Columbia from Europe, and I have a one-generation-long connection to the coast where I grew up and I've always lived, Indigenous peoples have lived there from time immemorial, and it is not easy or desirable. We're always evolving, but it's not easy or desirable to lose the things that are part of your history, your myth, your learning, and your culture. So we try to be sensitive to that. So, out of our risk assessment, we developed a climate preparedness and adaptation strategy. We've devoted about $500 million over 3 years to implement it, and it's part of a $2.1 billion plan to both help recover from the climate disasters we've experienced over the last year, droughts, extreme heat, and flooding, as well as to prepare to identify the risks and prepare our populations and our land mass for the risks to come. So as part of that, we're developing ocean acidification and hypoxia plan. We have much to learn from our neighbors to the south, and we want to do that work with our neighbors. We need to focus very, very closely on the risks to shellfish, the risks to shellfish aquaculture, which is an important part of the BC economy, from ocean acidification. We're looking at measures like seaweed aquaculture to help sequester carbon. We're looking at negative emissions technologies, and we are also developing a coastal marine strategy. So that is the context of what we're doing in British Columbia. We have lots to do, but we know we can't do it alone. We know that groups like the OA Alliance and the Pacific Coast Collaborative are absolutely essential to addressing the risks of climate change. And we also know, I'll simply close by saying that if we don't rapidly reduce the amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere, no amount of planning will help us adapt. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much, Minister Heyman and Congresswoman Bonamici. Amazing to have this leadership on the West Coast. As you can see, I should make it clear that the Ocean Acidification Alliance was launched by the Pacific Coast Collaborative, which shows the power of California, Oregon, Washington, and the province of British Columbia coming together and thinking about their regional challenges and regional solutions to this problem, and had been so successful on coordinating ocean acidification information and response that led to the OA Alliance bringing the show on the road and trying to engage other national governments and subnational governments around the world. So with that, I'd like to call up our panel for today. Come on up this direction, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of these local response strategies that governments are putting together that have been touched on our previous two speakers. I'll just quickly note that we had a really excellent video queued up from the California Office of the Insurance Commissioner, their Senior Climate Policy Advisor, Deborah Halberstadt. And I just want to emphasize that it is incredibly interesting and awesome that the California Office of Insurance Commissioner has a Senior Climate Policy Advisor. And I think that just speaks to the way that state insurance commissioners and other insurance industries are thinking about this challenge and starting to incorporate climate change into their work. Unfortunately, we can't show that video today, but I will make sure that it's posted in all of our sort of event follow-ups, and I definitely encourage you to check it out. It's a really important component of this discussion. So, with that, I will introduce speaker by speaker. How's that? And I'm just going to ask you a quick question and give you 5 minutes for reflections, and if we have questions at the end, we will do that. So the first speaker is Distinguished Senator John Laird from the state of California, District 17, and really happy that Senator Laird in previous roles have been part of the OA Alliance family for quite some time. And in fact, California's action plan has been an essential part of helping the state understand local vulnerability to human communities, and really includes strategies like nature-based solutions, like vulnerability assessments, and even evaluating water quality in the context of climate change. So generally, can you tell us more about California's coastal resilience strategies in the context of ongoing climate change, and how you guys are thinking about priorities and response?
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And as was alluded, I was Secretary for Natural Resources for all 8 years for Governor Jerry Brown. And Deborah Halberstadt, who will be on the tape that you'll see later, was head of the Oceans Program for the Resources Agency in that period before she moved. And I think it's really worth, for 1 second, mentioning the birth of the Alliance, because it is about taking action. It is about not standing by and letting things happen. And when we took office in early 2011, there was nothing going on about ocean acidification in California. And I convened a panel of scientists, and then they thought we needed more specific science, and we embarked on a science study. And then Washington and Oregon said, we're doing the same thing. So we joined in a 3-state science study, and when it was released, it laid the groundwork for the Ocean Acidification Alliance. And we were at the United Nations Oceans Conference in 2017 recruiting people for the Alliance. And at the time, I said really clearly, we happened to have a national government that was walking away from the Paris Accords and wasn't doing anything, and it meant we needed to organize, we needed to take action, we needed to not let that be the statement. And so having that many subnationals do their own plans, and I was secretary in 2018 when the California plan was released, it was really about taking that action and not letting the void go, and not letting people that wanted to walk away from Paris speak for us. And so it's a message for all the things you're going to hear on this stage about taking that action. And just a few specific things, because I think it also means being entrepreneurial. California has the largest network of marine protected areas in state waters off the 50 states. And it protects 16% of the state waters. It's science-based. It is adaptively managed. We negotiated with tribes, so their historic takes for subsistence and ceremonial purposes are incorporated into the overall framework. And it has started to see the revival of some historic species along the coast. And that is an important action to take. We're now advocating for an additional marine sanctuary, the Shumash Sanctuary, Native American based off of Central California. And we're coordinating it with all these other efforts. And we're looking, offshore wind is coming to California, and we have contracted for science studies on mammals, aviary resources to make sure that we protect them, that they are part of the overall equation. And when we just had a rather raucous discussion about extending the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant for 5 years, we really got environmental mitigations all the way through, including the protection of 12,000 acres of surrounding land and many other things. And so it then goes to the larger context, because I know Minister Heyman said that they were talking about the plan. Well, California updated all its goals in this legislative session very strongly. So 2045 carbon neutral, interim goals in getting there, a whole host of things that will help us continue to move, because for the uninitiated, the non-scientists, ocean acidification is the one ocean impact that comes from greenhouse gases. And so basically whatever we do on land for greenhouse gases is the best takeaway of the feeder for what is causing ocean acidification. So if we are transitioning away from fossil fuel, if we are electrifying the state, if we are doing the things that we should be doing anyway for climate, then that is the impact on oceans that makes all the difference. So I think that my message is take action. Don't be daunted if you think that things are intimidating. It's at an international level. Do the subnationals exactly as this alliance does. Be entrepreneurial. Look for the opportunities in what present themselves, and then set the high goals and allow us to have the tools to then do the ocean programs underneath. I mean, we have 30 by 30 in California to try to protect 30% of our oceans, 30% of land-based by 2030. And we have now $1.5 billion in the budget to try to implement that, to do it. And it gives us the chance to decide what in oceans is that to acquire and to protect. So I'm pleased to be here today, and just love the activism, and we'll love to continue the partnership in doing that.
Thank you so much, Senator. It warms my heart to hear all of this history around the OA Alliance and the leadership of the subnationals, and really thinking about response to this particular topic, but of course across the board in the context of Paris and beyond. So thank you for being here. And I'm so happy that we have so many friends on this panel. So it is now my honor to introduce Queen Quet of the Gullah Geechee Nation, who is not just a member of the OA Alliance, but a real leader internationally, helping to demonstrate how community priorities have to inform these higher level discussions at places like the UN, and also local climate risk assessments and response. So, can you tell us, Queen Quet, firstly, why the Gullah Geechee Nation decided to join the OA Alliance and make an OA action plan, and also some of the education materials, some of the content that you've been putting out regarding that work. And then I also hear that there's an exciting large salt marsh restoration project on the horizon. So if you can speak to that a little bit, that would be great.
Thank you, Jesse. There we go. Now we got them. Glad for day one more again, and glad for see on one more again. This your thing, the UN and thing like that. It seemed like we only meet each other over other parts of the world. So I'm glad for day on behalf of the Gullah Geechee Nation, the Queen Quet head from the body of the Gullah Geechee Nation, founder of the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition. So under the Eddie we crack we teeth like this year the way we crack we teeth, and we say the water to bring we, the water going to take we back. So in my culture, water is central to everything that we do. Not just because human bodies consist primarily of water, but we literally live in the Atlantic Ocean. So we are off the coast of the United States from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida on a chain of islands called the Sea Islands, where we have our own unique culture, language, and traditions. So it's a blessing to hear the opening remarks about cultural heritage and the value of that, and how you don't want to lose cultural values, cultural activities, and how water is sacred in various communities of people of color and culture. And so that is why the Gullah Geechee Nation was one of the first ones to wave our hand in the air and say, yes, we want to be part of this international alliance, because if the ocean is acidifying, what does that mean to us culturally and daily? Because we feed ourselves from the water, not just the ocean, but our estuaries. So I was very happy to hear that. The estuaries mentioned earlier. We feed ourselves spiritually and physically. And so for us, as we say, the water that we and we that the water, the land that we and we that the land. And so I always tell people, the land for us is family. The waterways are our bloodline. So if you think of it that way, why would you want to poison the waters? We need to consider what we do on the land, and how when the rain falls, that water goes somewhere. And people don't act like they realize that ditch systems and bioswales, that runoff goes there, but goes out into your estuaries, into your creeks, into your rivers, and where we are ends up in the ocean. So it's like, what are we doing on land that's impacting the water, thereby impacting us? Whether we look at it from the ritual standpoint, or we look at it from the eating standpoint. Everybody like for come where we did for nam fun thing like a shrimp, oyster, crab, all that kind of thing like that. Well, right before I came here, the Gullah Geechee Fishing Association had an event that we have every 2 years, which is our Gullah Geechee Seafood Festival. Now, we like to have that as just a fun event. We like to sit around, eat. Everyone doesn't want to eat, right? Good, healthy food, locally harvested from the water. Well, this year it had to be an education event because we couldn't serve crab, because the blue crabs aren't available. Why is that? People are saying, well, why? What's going on, Queen Quet? That gave me an opportunity to educate the community about this term ocean acidification that doesn't exist in the Gullah language. And so it's so important that we take those community gatherings as opportunities to elevate our ocean action plan, as well as our ocean acidification plan that we put forth to work with various partners, including the one you mentioned at the end. We have what we call the government alphabet soup, that I keep telling them I'm going to stir into a nice Gullah Geechee gumbo that they call Surpass and Pew, that we're working on the South Atlantic Salt Marsh Initiative to save 1 million acres of salt marsh. And so some might wonder, well, so what's the big deal? It's just grass, right? Well, no, it's not just grass. It actually helps to protect our coast from erosion as well as flooding. And people who've grown up on the Sea Islands, we love our salt marsh. We love seeing it. We're upset when it's missing from areas where we saw it all our childhoods growing up. But then we don't make the connection how it ties to all of these international issues and climate change. And so this is an opportunity for us to work collectively, as they call us, as subnationals, to say we can do this together, that state boundaries don't matter, that international boundaries don't matter, when this is an existential crisis that impacts all of us. And once again, if we're not concerned about anything else, we should be concerned about food security. So if we can no longer harvest crabs and oysters, and the oysters are the ones that cleanse water every day, and the salt marsh cleanses water every day, if we don't have them, we will eventually not have us. And so it's very important that we are part of these circles of discussion, collaboration, and partnership. So I'm so happy to be here with you once again, Jesse. We just got to stop getting together all the way in other countries. We got to get together in America to really show them that America is really all in.
Extra applause. Oh, thank you so much, Queen Quet. I am so happy that you're part of this family, and also had all these intentions of coming to the Sea Islands to come visit you before COVID, so we'll have to redraw the itineraries and get me over to one of the seafood feeds. That would be awesome. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for your leadership. It means so much, and is such a important part of talking about the urgency and the engagement around these topics, and also the tools that we have. So thank you for that. And talking about salt marsh is probably a good segue to our next speaker, who is going to be Miss Alex Clayton, who is part of the program for conserving marine life in the U.S. at Pew Charitable Trust. And Pew has been doing a lot of work helping states and other local partners explore the tools around coastal wetlands and submerged aquatic vegetation as nature-based solutions, potentially for climate mitigation. That means drawing carbon sequestration potential, as well as resilience and the myriad co-benefits that some of these ecosystems provide in addition, or maybe instead of long-term sequestration potential, depending on which ecosystem and where, and all of these thorny issues that you guys are working to sort out. So can you tell us more about the challenges and opportunities for states in this space, thinking about deploying, protecting, conserving these ecosystems for myriad climate purposes?
Yeah, is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, thank you. And I just want to echo my thanks for letting us co-host with the Ocean Acidification Alliance, and just honored to be a part of this panel today. So in the U.S., states, and in some case localities, really bear the responsibility of managing coastal blue carbon ecosystems like salt marsh, mangroves, and other coastal habitats. States in the last couple of years are increasingly recognizing the important role that these habitats can play in the climate mitigation space, in terms of sequestering and storing carbon. For example, as Congresswoman Bonamici mentioned, tidal forested wetlands in Oregon store carbon at rates on par with old growth forests, which is pretty impressive. However, unfortunately, in the U.S., over the past century, we've lost huge amounts of our coastal wetlands from practices like diking and draining. States like California have lost more than 90% of their habitats. So not only have states lost a significant amount of their coastal habitats, but there are also barriers in terms of incorporating coastal wetlands into these sort of state climate mitigation strategies, and really leveraging their blue carbon ecosystems for climate mitigation and to meet climate goals. So the first are that coastal wetlands are just often left out of state climate strategies due to the perception that there really isn't data or mapping available to develop these sort of greenhouse gas inventories for these ecosystems. States often also have difficulty obtaining this data to account for the amount of blue carbon captured. At Pew, we like to say it's really hard to manage what you can't measure. So essentially, states, are going to have a harder time managing their coastal wetlands for climate and for carbon sequestration if they don't have a proper understanding of really how much carbon is stored in there in the first place. Second, there's really kind of a lack of clear policy vehicle for states in terms of incorporating these wetlands into state climate goals. And third, there's really a need to understand sort of all the co-benefits associated with these habitats and really sort of package the benefits together, not just carbon sequestration, but all of the other benefits that I'll get into a little bit. So at Pew, to sort of address these challenges, we're really working with states and other partners. We're supporting both regional blue carbon research as well as the development of tools for states to access existing carbon data through databases like the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center's Coastal Carbon Atlas. And this atlas is the largest repository of coastal carbon data in the world. There's also federal tools available from EPA and NOAA that can provide states a starting point in terms of developing these blue carbon greenhouse gas inventories. And of course, the IPCC provides a methodology as well. And so we really work to help states, to connect states to these existing databases and bring awareness to sort of the data that is available for them to use. From a policy standpoint, we really try to elevate the role that coastal blue carbon can play in climate mitigation through state natural working land policies. And these sort of policies and plans really are focused on improving land management to reduce emissions and enhance carbon sequestration and storage. And we really try and highlight coastal wetlands within the context of these, and because they've traditionally been focused on forest and agricultural lands, which are sort of the big players, I guess, in that space. So we really try to highlight the role that wetlands can play in these strategies. And finally, in terms of sort of the co-benefits, as we discuss blue carbon with key decision makers and stakeholders, we really try to focus on the suite of co-benefits that these habitats provide in addition to carbon storage. So, resilience, water quality, biodiversity, support for local economies, recreational fishing, the list goes on. So in terms of opportunities, in terms of sort of blue carbon strategies that states can deploy, from a climate mitigation standpoint, protecting existing coastal habitats and building resilience is really the most important and cost-effective blue carbon strategy that states can use. So really, if we're talking about in terms of managing atmospheric CO2, the most important thing that states can do is to make sure that the carbon that is currently in the ground stays in the ground. And this includes making sure that coastal wetlands have room to migrate inland as sea levels rise. So these conservation efforts, will prevent the release of this stored carbon that's really been stored in the ground for millennia. And given, as I mentioned earlier, that the U.S. has experienced a significant decline in coastal habitats over the years, restoration is also an important component of, mitigation. So states can and should try to identify restoration projects that yield multiple benefits in addition to carbon storage. So, such as these co-benefits I mentioned earlier, like protecting coastal communities from storm surge and flooding, providing habitat for threatened and endangered species, and improving water quality. So some states like Oregon, for example, are in the process of developing what we're kind of calling blue carbon calculators that can really determine the carbon benefit of a restoration site and can help land managers in this aspect. California, their major investment in restoring the San Francisco Bay wetlands is really another example of how restoration can yield multiple benefits by enhancing blue carbon. According to an assessment that Pew supported for the San Francisco Bay estuary, total carbon sequestration increased over 30% between 1990 and 2020, thanks to significant restoration efforts in the area by local, state, and federal partners and NGOs sort of during those decades. So just sort of to wrap up and looking ahead, states are making progress in this area, right? Oregon's a leader in this space. California's a leader in this space. And we're trying to bring awareness to the states that are sort of providing this leadership to show other states like, okay, Oregon has done this. They have an example. You too can follow suit. There's data available for you to use. There's methodologies available. Really just trying to get states and countries even to learn from each other so we can just better protect, restore, these significant carbon sinks.
Thank you so much, Alex. And the work that Pew's doing on the potential of carbon sequestration of coastal wetlands across greenhouse gas inventories and thinking through state participation in that work is a great theme, I would say, for this regional alignment and partnership that we have through the Pacific Coast Collaborative. So really, we've had a couple discussions with the state governments of California, Oregon, Washington, and the province of British Columbia, and how we can think about a regional approach to some of the mapping, some of the research questions, some of the methods for incorporating these ecosystems in greenhouse gas inventories, and what that means for their carbon policy schemes, if you will. So really great opportunities to keep collaborating on that, and another great example of a regional scale collaboration on these types of topics that can really save some people a lot of time and provide maybe a model for other ways to approach this regionally. So thank you for that leadership. I'll also just say thanks to all of the panelists for being so great on your timing. I'm feeling really happy about that. No pressure. Yeah. So now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Brad Ack, who is the Executive Director of Ocean Visions. And one thing that we want to ask you, Brad, is we're having a lot of discussion at this particular COP around marine CDR, or marine carbon dioxide removal. And there is a lot of interest, and there's also a lot of concern in thinking about this approach to addressing climate ocean change. And so, in this context of a state panel and local activities, I really wanted to hear your thoughts on how states can help explore the research, the validity, and really the safety concerns around ocean-based carbon dioxide removal strategies at local scales. So it seems like there's a role for them to help define the research, the development, the verification, reporting, but also an opportunity to really help think through what the local engagement strategies have to be in these kind of smaller scale research development. So turn it over to you to provide your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Jesse. Thanks for inviting me, and sorry, I don't know if sound is very good. So let me just first set the context for why we need carbon removal. We are now at 420 plus parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, something that hasn't been seen for thousands of years, more than thousands of years. The last time we were at that level of carbon in the atmosphere, there were camels in the Arctic. That happened over a very long period of time. We've rapidly increased this carbon, and so the systems are still catching up, but all in the wrong direction, right? The oceans have been the biggest victim of this carbon to date. Even though we see the effects on land through heat waves and droughts and floods and superstorms, the oceans have taken the body blows of too much carbon. So they have absorbed 30% of that carbon, which is what we're here talking about today. But they're also absorbing 93% of all the heat that we're trapping, this extra heat that would otherwise be radiated back out into space, reflected back out into space, going into the ocean and unraveling the marine ecosystem. And this heat and acidification are very related, and they will not be turned off by net zero by 2050. They will only get worse. Right? So it's like going to the doctor with a illness, and the doctor says, let me tell you, here's the steps you need to take, and in 20 years, you're going to be a lot worse off, but you won't be dead. Would that be the type of medical advice you would want? I don't think so. I don't think any of us want that advice. We have to dial back CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere and in the upper layer of the ocean now. We need to go backwards from 420. We need a better target than 1.5 in net zero. I'm sorry, that to throw cold water on that target, but that's a target to be worse off and to have a far more acidified ocean and a far more dangerous world for most residents. So with that said, we are doing a lot of work on carbon removal technologies inspired by the natural cycles of the ocean. If we were to disappear tomorrow, over the next 100,000 years, the ocean would cycle all this carbon that we put into the atmosphere, and it would end up in the deep where there are already 37,000 gigatons or 50 times more carbon in the air, because that's what the ocean does over long periods of time. So the question is, can we accelerate that? Can we use the power of the ocean to draw down massive amounts of carbon and safely put it as deep blue carbon, bicarbonate, and calcium carbonate in the bottom of the ocean? There are a number of pathways, some of which actually also ameliorate ocean acidification. This is the beauty. There are a whole bunch of pathways that are adding base liquid or alkaline rock to seawater to basically increase pH, and in increasing pH, precipitate out through a fairly complex chemical process carbonates and take CO2 out of the water. We don't know very much about these approaches yet, and this is where I answer your question. States and provinces like British Columbia can lead the way in the research and development and testing necessary to determine how these things work and whether they work. One of our partners is Ocean Networks Canada, based in British Columbia at the University of Victoria. They have an amazing array of infrastructure in the ocean to do these kind of tests. We're actually working with a company right now that is soon to be doing a test in the state of Washington with the Pacific shellfish growers on board and the tribes who will be looking at the results of that test. The federal government is not, we heard from the Congresswoman, there's now a big chunk of money to move this forward through the federal process. It's going to take years. It's great, but before that money actually gets deployed, it's going to take a long time. States can move much more quickly. And California being a perfect example, 7th largest economy in the world. If California decided to take this on, 5th? 4th, okay. If California decided to take this on, it could move the needle on this issue extremely quickly, as could countries that are part of the OA Alliance that aren't the U.S., right? There are many, many coastal nations that we would love to get involved in this research and development agenda. If you're interested, please find me or look me up, and I would be happy to tell you more about how that can happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brad, and to all of our panelists. This has been just a delight and a happy reunion, and a really, for me, a happy way to see the evolution of our work together over the last couple years. So I really appreciate that. I think we have a little bit of time for questions if anyone has one. No? I have one, if that's all right, for you, sir. So talking about these local scale pilots on marine CDR and the community engagement, can you just talk a little bit more about what that community engagement actually looks like? I don't know how much you're allowed to share about the Washington experience or the Washington pilot, but how is that engagement being facilitated? What are the types of questions, concerns, and even engagement in the research? What has that kind of framework shaped up to be?
Well, thanks for that question. There's a lot of concern about trying these technologies, and rightly so, right? We don't know the full effects, positive and negative, because there may be positive effects like the one I mentioned with ocean acidification. We just don't know. But we will never know unless we do controlled field trials in the ocean. You cannot answer these questions in laboratories and in models. You can get a good portion of the way there, but you have to do controlled field trials. There is a lot of work going on around a code of conduct, ethical code for how this kind of research has to happen. One of our core partners, the American Geophysical Union, is leading a global effort to create an ethical framework for this research. So, we absolutely, and that ethical framework will absolutely include transparency, involvement, the full transmission of results for review by any interested parties, all of those sorts of things. But we cannot address this crisis we face without taking some risks. We are, every day by inaction, we are increasing our risk every single day. And so we have to take some risk to see if we can find tools that will solve this problem. We need to do it smartly, but we need to do it quickly. So we have an urgency to act, and we also have to bring people along. It's a very difficult challenge, but one that we all have to get engaged in to do. And I think the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification can be a great partner in this effort.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you to our awesome panelists. And before we go, I have one more final speaker, and I'm really excited to call her up. Maybe I'll just trade you, Anna Marie. Chairs. And it's Anna Marie. Sorry. I know your last name, Anna Marie Laura, who is Director of Climate Policy at the Ocean Conservancy. And at first I asked Anna Marie to come and sort of talk about how the Ocean Conservancy is engaging states and subnational governments in this work and the power of subnational collaboration per our discussion today. But upon being here for the first week, I think it's actually more interesting to hear from Anna Marie in some of her other roles, working with an ocean caucus here at COP27, some of the state parties, some of the delegates that are really thinking about the ocean agenda here at the UNFCCC and what's needed, and just to share out a little bit with all of us of what those conversations look like, and importantly, how we as subnational governments and subnational actors and civil society are really helping inform that discussion and can help inform it further. So over to you for closing remarks, bringing us, go ahead.
Great. Well, I'm also really happy to be here. Thank you, Jesse, and thank you, Pew and the OA Alliance for holding this event. I do think that we talk a lot at COP about where the momentum for change comes from, and we talk about top down, and we talk a lot about bottom up, and we don't talk about starting in the middle with subnational action. And subnational means a lot of different things. Here at UNFCCC and COP, subnational actually might look like the nations here that are parties to the UNFCCC. They are trying to influence a global community. they're trying to influence a global community. And so the presidency, the secretariat, those decisions are really where then the nations are the subnational. You know, they are the ones speaking for their constituencies and for local people. And it's also really great. I'm from the U.S. It's great to be in the Americas All-In Pavilion because when we saw the U.S. step back, this was where our federal government came to continue conversations, and this is where states came to continue talking about their action. So it's just really nice to be here. We do lead a group called the Friends of the Ocean and Climate Parties, and these are parties who are committed to ocean and climate action and seeing ocean climate solutions show up in NDCs in their own, as well as talking about the best practices to make sure they show up in other NDCs, and to make sure the ocean has a space here at COP. So last year in Glasgow, there was a mandate for an ocean climate dialogue. It will now be annual, and the first one of those that happened in person happened at the SUBSTA in June. It covered the range of ocean climate solutions that we've heard about today, from renewable energy to decarbonizing shipping to protecting blue carbon. Now it is, all of our job as advocates and of the nations that are committed to ocean climate action to make sure that dialogue stays a very useful place for these discussions. If we do not talk at a technical, detailed level, the way that so many panelists and subnational leaders did today, about how these solutions roll out, then we don't have the opportunity for nations and parties to learn from each other and to create the policies enabling conditions that we need to see action. So that dialogue is one way that we can start to see more ocean climate solutions integrated into NDCs and then see that trickle down to national and subnational action. And that's really one of the most important things. I'll just say the other part of that mandate in Glasgow was that ocean and climate, ocean and coasts are integrated into all of the work programs, the agenda items, the constituted bodies of the UNFCCC. So that means if we're talking about finance and the Standing Committee on Finance, SDG 14 is the least invested in SDG. We do not have enough going to these types of mitigation solutions or to coastal adaptation, and we need to change that. They should be talking about that in the Standing Committee on Finance. We're talking about in Article 6, voluntary carbon markets. How do we and how should we be thinking about blue carbon, carbon dioxide removal? Do we have ocean scientists engaged? Do we have leadership that's paying attention to Article 6 discussions from an ocean and coastal perspective? So these are just a couple of the ways that we can start to integrate ocean and coast across the UNFCCC, and the dialogue and that mandate from Glasgow can all really help to do that. So I will leave it there. Thank you, Jesse, for having me, and I learned so much, and it was great to see all of your panelists. What a great event.
I will echo the appreciation for this great panel, great partners, and I'll just say the work continues. So if you are interested in learning more about joining the OA Alliance or being part of our community of actors, definitely come find me. And thank you to the coordinators of this pavilion. We all know here that coordinating pavilions is about the hardest job in the world. So thank you for keeping it up, and 1 week down, one more to go. So thank you so much.